Hey, tonight, we're setting sail across centuries to explore one of humanity's most persistent challenges: how our ancestors survived the vast, unforgiving oceans when fresh water was more precious than gold itself. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Let's begin our story along the shores of ancient Phoenicia, in what we now call Lebanon and Syria. Picture yourself as a young sailor, perhaps 16 or 17 years old, standing barefoot on sun-warmed cedar planks. Your calloused hands grip a clay amphora, one of dozens lined up along the ship's hold like terracotta soldiers preparing for battle against thirst itself. The Phoenicians, those master traders of the ancient world, understood something fundamental that would echo through maritime history. Water was the ultimate currency at sea. While gold and silver might buy you passage to distant lands, fresh water bought you life itself. These early seafarers developed the first systematic approaches to water storage and rationing that would influence naval practices for the next 3,000 years. You're watching the loading process now, and it's a ritual as sacred as any religious ceremony. Each amphora holds roughly 8 gallons of precious fresh water, enough to sustain one person for about a week if carefully rationed. The pottery isn't chosen randomly. These vessels are crafted from special clay that's been fired at specific temperatures to minimize seepage while allowing just enough porosity to keep the water cool through evaporation. The loading master, a weathered man whose skin has been carved by decades of salt wind, calls out numbers in the ancient Phoenician tongue. 20 amphorae for a crew of 12 on a month-long journey. The mathematics of survival reduced to its simplest terms. Will we have enough to reach the next port, or will we be drinking our own urine before we sight land? As you help lower each heavy vessel into the ship's belly, you notice how they're positioned. This isn't haphazard storage, it's maritime engineering, passed down through generations. The amphorae are nestled in beds of sand and sawdust, cushioned against the ship's inevitable rolling and protected from the temperature extremes that could crack the clay or spoil the water within. The ship's captain, a man whose authority stems not from noble birth, but from decades of successful voyages, approaches the water stores with reverence. He's seen ships return to port with crews driven mad by thirst, men who threw themselves overboard rather than endure another day of salt-cracked lips and swollen tongues. He's also seen the miraculous efficiency of proper water management turn potential disasters into profitable ventures. Take a moment here to like this video if you're enjoying our journey back in time, and don't forget to subscribe to join us for more peaceful explorations through history. The captain's water management system is deceptively simple yet brilliantly effective. Each crew member receives a daily ration measured not in generous portions but in carefully calculated survival minimums. Picture a small ceramic cup perhaps holding 6 to 8 ounces. This becomes your entire daily water allowance for drinking. Not for washing, not for cooking, just for keeping your body's essential functions operating. But here's where Phoenician ingenuity truly shines. They understood that the human body's water needs aren't constant. During the cool pre-dawn hours, when dew still clings to the rigging and the Mediterranean hasn't yet begun its daily assault of blazing heat, water rations are smaller. As the sun climbs higher and the work becomes more demanding, rations increase. Slightly. This wasn't just practical wisdom, it was early human physiology in action. You're experiencing this rationing system firsthand now. The morning sun has barely cleared the horizon, painting the sea in shades of copper and gold, when the water keeper, a trusted crew member whose loyalty has been proven through multiple voyages, appears with his measuring cup. The ritual is always the same. He calls your name, you present your personal drinking vessel, and he pours your morning ration with the precision of a priest conducting sacred rites. The water itself tells a story. It's been stored in darkness for days or weeks, taking on the subtle flavors of clay and the herbs that were added during the loading process. Phoenician sailors discovered that certain plants, mint, fennel, and particularly a Mediterranean herb called dittany, could keep stored water fresh longer while adding minerals essential for health during long voyages. As you sip this precious liquid, rolling it around your mouth to extract every bit of moisture and flavor, you're participating in one of humanity's oldest survival rituals. This water might have been drawn from a well in Tyre, collected from a mountain spring in the Lebanese hills, or carefully gathered during a rare rainfall. Each drop connects you to the land you've left behind and the land you hope to reach. Now, let our journey drift forward in time, roughly 6 centuries, to the height of Roman naval power. You find yourself aboard a Roman grain ship, one of those massive vessels that kept the empire fed by hauling wheat from Egypt to feed the million-du-Sur, mouths of Rome itself. These ships were floating cities, some stretching over 180 feet in length and capable of carrying more than 1,000 tons of cargo. The Romans approached the water problem with their characteristic engineering precision. Where the Phoenicians relied on pottery and careful rationing, Rome brought systematic innovation to maritime water management. You're standing now in the ship's specially designed water storage area, what the Romans called the aquarium, and marveling at an engineering solution that wouldn't be significantly improved upon for another 1,000 years. The Roman innovation began with the containers themselves. While amphorae were still used, the Romans also employed large wooden barrels called dolia, massive oak vessels that could hold 50 gallons or more. But the real breakthrough was in the treatment and preservation of the water before it even reached the ships. Picture yourself in the port of Ostia, Rome's principal harbor, watching the water preparation process. Roman engineers had developed a multi-stage system for ensuring stored water remained drinkable for months at sea. Fresh water was first collected in large settling basins where particles could sink to the bottom. Then it was filtered through layers of sand, charcoal, and clean gravel, essentially creating one of history's first municipal water treatment systems. But the Romans went further. They understood that stagnant water breeds disease and develops unpleasant tastes that can make it nearly undrinkable. Their solution was both simple and ingenious. They added wine, not enough to intoxicate the crew, but sufficient to create what they called aqua vitae, water of life. The alcohol content, usually around 2 to 3%, was just enough to inhibit bacterial growth while adding calories and making the water more palatable. You're tasting this mixture now, and it's surprisingly pleasant. The wine, usually a rough, local vintage that wouldn't have been considered drinking quality on land, transforms the flat, stale taste of stored water into something almost refreshing. The Romans had accidentally discovered that ethanol could preserve water long before they understood the scientific principles behind fermentation and antisepsis. The rationing system aboard Roman vessels was equally sophisticated. The ship's Aquarius, the waterkeeper, maintained detailed records carved into wax tablets, tracking not just daily consumption, but individual crew members' health and work assignments. Men working in the hot sun handling sails got slightly larger rations than those working below decks. Rowers, who lost enormous amounts of water through perspiration, received the largest allocations of all. Roman naval medicine had also discovered the connection between water consumption and various ailments that plagued long voyages. They noticed that crews who maintained steady water intake suffered less from what we now know as scurvy, though they attributed this to the balance of humors rather than vitamin deficiency. They also understood that men who tried to stretch their rations too thin often developed kidney stones and other urinary problems. I'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight, and what time is it for you? Drop a comment below and let me know if you're settling in for sleep or perhaps listening during a quiet moment in your day. The Romans also pioneered the use of what they called aqua marina temperata, tempered seawater. While they understood that drinking pure seawater was deadly, they discovered that in extreme emergencies, seawater could be mixed with wine or vinegar in specific proportions to create a solution that could keep a man alive for several additional days. This wasn't pleasant. The mixture was described by surviving accounts as worse than medicine, but it could mean the difference between life and death when fresh water ran critically low. You're experiencing this desperate measure now, imagining yourself 3 weeks into what was supposed to be a 2-week voyage from Alexandria to Rome. The grain ship has been blown off course by unseasonable storms, and the water barrels are nearly empty. The captain has authorized the emergency rations, 1 part seawater to 4 parts wine, with a splash of vinegar to mask the salt. The liquid burns your throat and leaves your mouth feeling somehow both wet and dry at the same time. Your body accepts it grudgingly, and you can feel your kidneys working overtime to process the salt load. But it's keeping you alive, buying precious time until the next port or the next rainfall. Roman ships also carried what they called mel aqua, honey water. This served multiple purposes. The honey provided quick energy, the natural antimicrobial properties helped preserve the mixture, and the sweetness made other less palatable water sources more tolerable. Imagine sipping this ancient sports drink as your ship rolls gently through the Mediterranean swells, the honey coating your throat while providing the sugars your body craves after days of hard physical labor. Our journey now takes us into colder, harsher waters. The time is roughly 900 CE, and you find yourself aboard a Viking longship cutting through the gray-green waters of the North Atlantic. The contrast with Mediterranean sailing couldn't be more dramatic. Here, the challenges of water procurement and storage take on entirely different dimensions. You're no longer dealing with the predictable heat and calm seas that dominated Roman maritime experience. Instead, you're facing the unique problems of northern seafaring, unpredictable weather, shorter sailing seasons, and the need to carry survival supplies for journeys into completely unknown territories where the next source of fresh water might be hundreds of miles away. The Vikings approached water storage with characteristic practicality and innovation born from necessity. Their ships were smaller and faster than Roman grain vessels, which meant every inch of storage space had to serve multiple purposes. You're examining their water storage system now, a series of wooden casks made from oak staves, sealed with pine pitch and animal fat, and designed to fit perfectly into the curved hull of the longship. These weren't just containers, they were examples of sophisticated woodland craftsmanship. Each cask was made from oak that had been aged for years, with the grain running in specific directions to minimize leakage. The hoops were forged iron, not wood, because the Vikings had learned that wooden hoops would shrink and expand with temperature changes, potentially causing catastrophic water loss during critical moments. But the Vikings' real innovation lay in their understanding of water procurement during voyages of exploration. Unlike Mediterranean sailors who could plan their routes around known ports and water sources, Viking explorers often ventured into territories where no human had ever set foot. They had to become masters of finding and collecting fresh water from whatever sources nature provided. Picture yourself now as part of Leif Erikson's crew, somewhere off the coast of what would later be called Newfoundland. You've been at sea for weeks, and the water casks are running low. But the Vikings had developed techniques for emergency water collection that would serve as survival wisdom for centuries to come. The first technique was rainwater collection. Viking ships carried large pieces of sailcloth that could be quickly rigged into funnel systems whenever rain began to fall. But this wasn't as simple as just catching water. The Vikings had learned that the first few minutes of rainfall washed salt and debris from the sails and rigging, making the water undrinkable. They would let this initial flow run off, then carefully collect only the cleaner water that followed. You're participating in this process now, feeling the cold Atlantic rain soaking through your woolen cloak as you help position the collection cloths. The water that finally reaches the storage vessels is remarkably clean, cold, fresh, and tasting faintly of the oak barrels it flows into. This rainwater often provided a psychological boost as much as physical relief, breaking the monotony of carefully rationed supplies with the bounty of nature's unexpected gift. The Vikings also perfected the art of ice and snow collection. In Sobdid, the northern latitudes where they operated, fresh water often came in frozen form. But they quickly learned that not all ice was suitable for drinking. Old sea ice, which had been frozen for years, actually lost most of its salt content and could be melted for relatively safe consumption. Fresh ice and snow, of course, provided excellent water sources when available. You're now huddled around a small brazier in the ship's center, watching chunks of ancient ice slowly melt in an iron pot. The process is almost meditative. The gradual transformation from solid to liquid, the gentle hiss of melting ice, the way the water seems to capture and hold the pale northern light. This ice might have been floating in Arctic waters for decades before finding its way into your drinking cup. Viking water discipline was legendary, born from the harsh realities of exploration in unforgiving environments. The ship's waterkeeper, often the ship's owner or captain himself, maintained absolute control over water distribution. Rationing was based not just on supply and demand, but on individual crew members' essential roles and physical condition. The strongest rowers and the most experienced navigators received slightly larger rations, not from favoritism but from practical necessity. A navigator suffering from dehydration might make crucial errors that could doom the entire expedition. A rower weakened by thirst couldn't maintain the pace necessary to reach safety in deteriorating weather conditions. But Viking water management also included something Mediterranean sailors rarely had to consider: the psychological aspects of water scarcity during long voyages into unknown territories. When you don't know if the next landfall will provide fresh water. When you're sailing beyond the edge of all known maps, the mental stress of water rationing becomes as challenging as the physical effects of thirst. Take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already. We're going to continue exploring these fascinating survival stories throughout history. The Vikings developed what we might call the first maritime psychology of water management. They understood that hope and morale were as essential as the water itself. When supplies ran critically low, experienced captains would sometimes discover hidden reserve casks that had been secretly maintained throughout the voyage. These weren't deceptions meant to mislead the crew, but calculated morale management, designed to prevent the despair that could lead to mutiny or panic. You're experiencing this moment now. The captain has just announced that a reserve cask has been found wedged behind some stored weapons. The relief that washes over the crew is palpable, even though the additional water only extends supplies by a few days. It's enough to maintain hope until the next opportunity for resupply presents itself. Viking ships also carried what they called sour water, a fermented mixture of water, honey, and berries that provided both hydration and nutrition during long voyages. This was an early form of what we might recognize as fermented beverages, with enough alcohol content to prevent spoilage while providing calories and making stored water more palatable. The taste is complex and slightly effervescent. Imagine a cross between weak beer and fruit juice, with an underlying tartness that actually seems to quench thirst more effectively than plain water. The fermentation process created B vitamins that helped prevent some of the nutritional deficiencies common during long sea voyages. Time shifts again, and we find ourselves in the 12th century aboard a ship carrying pilgrims from Venice to the Holy Land. The vessel is operated by monks from a maritime monastery, men who have turned the practical necessities of sea travel into something approaching a sacred art. You're surrounded by an interesting mix of passengers, wealthy merchants traveling for trade, poor pilgrims who've saved for years to afford passage, and the monastic crew who view their maritime service as a form of devotion. The approach to water management on these ships reflects this unique blend of practical necessity and religious discipline. The monastic crews had developed water management systems based on the principles of their religious communities: careful stewardship, equitable distribution, and the understanding that physical survival and spiritual well-being were intimately connected. Water wasn't just a practical necessity. It was seen as one of God's greatest gifts, to be treated with reverence and gratitude. Picture yourself participating in the morning water distribution, which begins not with practical announcements, but with a brief prayer of thanksgiving. The monk serving as waterkeeper, Brother Marcus, a man whose gentle demeanor conceals decades of maritime experience, blesses each portion before distributing it. This isn't empty ritual. It's a psychological technique that transforms the daily ration from a reminder of scarcity into a moment of gratitude and community. The storage system on these monastery ships reflected centuries of accumulated wisdom. Water was stored in a combination of sealed ceramic vessels and wooden barrels but with innovations that earlier sailors hadn't developed. The ceramics were glazed with techniques learned from Islamic potters, making them completely watertight and resistant to the growth of algae and bacteria that could spoil stored water. The wooden barrels were crafted using techniques that combined European coopering with Eastern preservation methods learned during the Crusades. They were lined with beeswax and sealed with a mixture of pine resin and frankincense, the latter not just for its pleasant smell, but for its antimicrobial properties that helped keep water fresh during long voyages. You're tasting this preserved water now, and it carries subtle flavors that tell the story of its storage. Hints of oak and pine, a faint sweetness from the beeswax lining, and an almost imperceptible trace of frankincense that makes each sip feel ceremonial. The water has been stored for weeks, yet it tastes cleaner and fresher than much of the water available. Medieval ships also carried what the monks called aqua benedicta, blessed water that served both practical and spiritual purposes. This water was specially prepared using techniques that inadvertently created some of history's most effective water purification methods. The blessing ceremony involved adding small amounts of wine, salt, and holy oil to the water, then exposing it to sunlight for specific periods. The wine provided alcohol for preservation. The salt created an environment hostile to harmful bacteria, and the oil formed a thin barrier that prevented contamination. The sunlight exposure, which the monks believed was essential for receiving divine blessing, actually provided UV sterilization that killed many waterborne pathogens. Medieval pilgrimage ships also dealt with a challenge their predecessors rarely faced, managing water supplies for passengers who weren't professional sailors. Merchants and pilgrims often lacked the discipline and understanding necessary for effective water rationing during long voyages. You're witnessing this challenge firsthand as Brother Marcus attempts to explain to a wealthy Flemish merchant why he cannot have extra water for washing his fine clothes. The merchant, accustomed to abundant fresh water on land, struggles to understand that aboard ship every drop has a calculated purpose. His silk garments will remain dirty rather than risk the crew's survival supplies. The monks had developed educational systems to help passengers understand and accept water rationing. They used religious parables and stories to explain the importance of conservation, framing water discipline as a form of spiritual exercise rather than mere deprivation. Passengers were taught to view their limited water rations as an opportunity for spiritual growth through practicing self-denial and appreciation for God's gifts. I'm curious, what's your favorite historical period? Let me know in the comments, and maybe we'll explore it in a future sleep journey together. Medieval water management also included sophisticated medical understanding that was ahead of its time. The monastery ship's physicians, often monks who had studied in the medical schools of Salerno or Montpellier, understood the connection between water consumption and various ailments that affected long-distance travelers. They had observed that passengers who maintained steady water intake suffered less from what they called sea madness, probably what we would recognize as severe dehydration combined with scurvy. They also noticed that certain combinations of stored water with herbs and honey seemed to prevent the swollen gums and loose teeth that plagued long voyages. The physicians carried special water preparations that served as medieval sports drinks, mixtures of honey, vinegar, and water that provided quick energy and helped maintain electrolyte balance during the physical demands of sea travel. You're sipping one of these preparations now. The honey provides immediate energy, the vinegar adds essential minerals, and the whole mixture has a refreshing tartness that seems to cut through the stale air of the ship's lower decks. Medieval ships also pioneered the use of distillation for emergency water production. While the techniques were primitive compared to later developments, some ships carried simple copper stills that could convert small amounts of seawater into drinking water. The process was slow and fuel-intensive, making it practical only during dire emergencies, but it represented an important technological advancement. Picture yourself watching this distillation process during a crisis moment when the ship's regular water supplies have been contaminated by a leak that allowed seawater to mix with the fresh water stores. The copper still, heated by a carefully maintained charcoal fire, slowly transforms seawater into precious drops of pure water. The process is inefficient. It takes enormous amounts of fuel to produce small quantities of water, but each drop could mean the difference between life and death. Our journey now carries us forward to the late 15th century, where you find yourself aboard a Portuguese caravel somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean, perhaps part of Vasco da Gama's expedition rounding the Cape of Good Hope, or sailing with Columbus toward what Europeans would call the New World. The age of exploration presented unprecedented challenges for water management. These weren't coastal voyages with predictable resupply points, but journeys into completely unknown waters where the next source of fresh water might be thousands of miles away. The Portuguese and Spanish had to revolutionize maritime water storage and management to make these epical voyages possible. You're standing in the hold of the caravel now, surrounded by an impressive array of water storage containers that represent the culmination of centuries of maritime engineering. There are traditional amphorae for short-term storage, oak barrels of various sizes for medium-term supplies, and innovative new containers made from treated leather that can be collapsed when empty to save space. The Portuguese had developed what they called barricas de agua, specialized water barrels that incorporated design elements learned from their explorations along the African coast. These barrels were made from specific types of oak that had been aged in particular ways, with staves cut to precise measurements that would expand and contract predictably as the ship moved through different climate zones. But the real innovation was in the barrel preparation. Before being filled with water, each barrel was seasoned with a carefully controlled mixture of wine, vinegar, and herbs. The barrel would be filled with this mixture and left to cure for weeks, allowing the wood to absorb the preservative compounds. When finally filled with fresh water, the wood would slowly release these compounds, keeping the water fresh and drinkable for months. You're tasting water from one of these specially prepared barrels, and the difference is remarkable. Despite being stored for weeks in the ship's hold, in tropical heat and constant motion, the water tastes clean and refreshing. There's a subtle complexity to the flavor. Hints of oak and wine, with herbal notes that make each sip satisfying rather than merely functional. Spanish ships pioneered a different approach, the use of silver containers for water storage. This wasn't ostentation but practical chemistry. Spanish explorers had observed that water stored in silver vessels stayed fresh longer than water stored in other materials. They didn't understand the antimicrobial properties of silver ions, but they recognized the practical results. Picture yourself as a ship's officer aboard one of Cortez's vessels, responsible for managing the precious silver water containers reserved for the captain and senior crew. These aren't large vessels. Silver was too valuable to use for bulk storage. But they served as emergency reserves and as treatment vessels for crew members suffering from water-related illnesses. The water from silver containers had a distinctive taste, clean and somehow more refreshing than water from other sources. When a crew member fell ill from contaminated water, a few days of rations from the silver containers often restored their health. This was practical medicine centuries before anyone understood the scientific principles involved. Age of exploration ships also dealt with a new challenge: managing water supplies during the extreme climate variations encountered on these lengthy voyages. A ship might leave Europe in winter, cross the equator during the hottest months, then reach the southern hemisphere during their winter season. Water storage systems had to function effectively across this entire range of conditions. Portuguese engineers developed flexible rationing systems that could be adjusted based on climate conditions and crew workload. During the relatively cool Atlantic crossing, crew members might receive smaller rations, but as ships approached the equatorial heat, rations would increase, and during periods of intense physical labor, such as navigating around the Cape of Good Hope, they might increase further. You're experiencing this adaptive rationing system now. The ship has been sailing in tropical waters for days, and the heat is relentless. Your daily water ration has been increased by about 20% compared to the cooler portions of the voyage. It's still not enough to feel fully satisfied, but it's sufficient to maintain your health and working capacity. Take a moment to like this video if you're finding these historical survival stories as fascinating as I do. Spanish ships developed what they called agua de reserva, reserve water supplies that were stored using techniques learned from both European monasteries and Islamic scholars encountered during the Reconquista. These reserves were treated with combinations of honey, wine, and spices that not only preserved the water, but turned it into a medicine that could treat various ailments common during long voyages. The spices weren't chosen randomly. Cinnamon and cloves had antimicrobial properties, cardamom helped with digestion, and ginger could combat nausea, essential for crew members suffering from both seasickness and the stomach problems that often accompanied poor quality water. You're sipping this spiced water now, and it's more like a medicinal tea than simple drinking water, with complex flavors that seem to warm you from the inside out. Exploration-era ships also pioneered systematic rainwater collection on a scale never before attempted. These vessels carried specialized canvas systems that could be deployed quickly whenever rain began to fall. The canvas was specially treated with pine tar and beeswax to make it waterproof, then rigged with a complex system of ropes and pulleys that could funnel collected rainwater directly into storage containers. Picture yourself participating in this rainwater collection during a tropical storm off the coast of Brazil. The ship is pitching and rolling in heavy seas, but the crew works with practiced efficiency to deploy the collection system. Within minutes, precious fresh water is flowing into the barrels, each gallon extending the voyage's range by another day or two. The psychological aspects of water management also evolved during this period. Ship captains learned that maintaining crew morale during long voyages required not just adequate water supplies, but the perception that water was being managed fairly and competently. They developed elaborate ceremonies around water distribution, turning daily rationing into events that reinforced crew unity and hierarchy. You're participating in one of these ceremonies now. The captain himself appears for the evening water distribution, not because his presence is practically necessary, but because it demonstrates that water management is the ship's highest priority. Each crew member's name is called, each ration is measured precisely, and the ceremony concludes with a toast to the success of the voyage. Our journey takes an adventurous turn as we find ourselves in the early 18th century aboard a pirate ship somewhere in the Caribbean. You're no longer dealing with the organized efficiency of naval vessels or the religious discipline of monastery ships. Instead, you're experiencing water management in its most desperate and creative forms, where survival often depended on audacity, ingenuity, and the willingness to take extraordinary risks. Pirate ships faced unique challenges in water procurement and storage. They couldn't simply sail into friendly ports to resupply. Most harbors would either arrest them on site or charge extortionate prices for basic necessities. They had to become masters of improvisation, finding ways to obtain and preserve fresh water through methods that legitimate sailors would never have considered. You're standing on the deck of a brigantine that's been at sea for 6 weeks, longer than originally planned due to unsuccessful raids and adverse winds. The water situation is becoming critical, and the crew is implementing survival techniques that blend maritime tradition with outlaw innovation. Pirate water management began with superior storage techniques developed out of necessity. Since pirates couldn't rely on regular resupply, they had to make their water last longer than conventional sailors. They pioneered the use of multiple, small containers rather than large barrels, reasoning that if one container became contaminated or was damaged during battle, they wouldn't lose their entire water supply. You're examining their storage system now. Dozens of small wooden kegs, ceramic jugs, and even hollowed gourds, each holding just a few gallons of water. The containers are distributed throughout the ship, hidden in lockers, secured behind false bulkheads, and even buried among other cargo. This distributed storage system meant that even a direct hit from enemy cannon was unlikely to destroy all the ship's water supplies. Pirates also developed the most sophisticated water recycling systems of their era. They couldn't afford to waste a single drop, so they created methods for reclaiming and purifying water that had become contaminated or stale. They used simple distillation techniques to purify questionable water, employed charcoal filtration systems, and even developed methods for making brackish water drinkable. Picture yourself participating in an emergency water reclamation project. The ship's regular supplies have been contaminated by seawater that leaked through a crack, caused by cannon fire during the previous week's unsuccessful attack on a Spanish merchant vessel. The crew has rigged a makeshift, still using a copper, pot stolen from a captured ship, some canvas tubing, and a collection vessel positioned to catch the distilled water as it condenses. The process is slow and dangerous. Maintaining a fire aboard a wooden ship is always risky, but it's producing small quantities of clean drinking water from the contaminated supplies. Each drop is precious, and you can taste the desperation in the careful way crew members savor their portions of this reclaimed water. Pirates were also masters of opportunistic water collection. They developed techniques for quickly gathering fresh water from any source they encountered, whether it was a brief landing on a tropical island, capturing supplies from other vessels, or even collecting dew and rainwater with unprecedented efficiency. You're participating in one of these opportunistic collection efforts now. The ship is anchored off a small Caribbean island, little more than a patch of sand and palm trees, but the crew has discovered a small freshwater spring hidden among the rocks. Working with practiced efficiency, they're using every available container to collect and transport water back to the ship. The process is almost military in its organization, despite the ragtag appearance of the crew. Buckets, pots, barrels, and even leather boots are pressed into service as water containers. A human chain passes full containers up the beach, while empty ones flow back down. Every crew member knows their role, and the entire operation is completed. In less than an hour, speed was essential when you never knew if enemy ships might appear on the horizon. Pirate ships also pioneered aggressive water acquisition through what they politely called requisitioning from other vessels. This wasn't simple theft, but a survival strategy that required careful planning and execution. Pirates learned to identify which ships were likely to carry the largest water supplies and develop tactics for capturing these supplies with minimal damage to the containers. You're witnessing one of these water raids now. A Spanish merchant vessel has been spotted on the horizon, and the pirate crew is preparing for an attack that focuses specifically on capturing the ship's water supplies rather than its monetary cargo. The boarding party carries specialized tools for quickly locating and transferring water containers, and they've practiced these techniques until they can strip a ship of its fresh water supplies in minutes. The captured water is immediately tested and rationed according to quality. The clearest, freshest water is reserved for drinking, while lower quality water might be used for cooking or medical purposes. Nothing is wasted. Even water that's begun to turn green with algae can be boiled and used for washing or cleaning wounds. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this journey so far. Are there any particular aspects of historical survival that you'd like me to explore in future videos? Let me know in the comments below. Pirates also developed some of the most extreme emergency water techniques in maritime history. When faced with complete water exhaustion, they employed methods that legitimate sailors considered too dangerous or desperate to attempt. These included drinking their own urine after it had been filtered through charcoal and sand, consuming the blood of captured sea turtles, and even attempting to extract moisture from seaweed and other ocean vegetation. You're experiencing one of these desperate moments now. The ship has been becalmed for 2 weeks in the doldrums, the oppressive windless zone near the equator where ships can sit motionless for days or weeks. The water supplies are exhausted, and the crew is implementing survival techniques that would have been unthinkable under normal circumstances. The process of filtering and consuming recycled urine is both disgusting and life-saving. The crew has constructed a filtration system using layers of sand, charcoal, and cloth that removes the worst impurities and odors. The resulting liquid is far from pleasant, but it provides enough water to keep the crew alive until the next opportunity for resupply arrives. Pirate medical knowledge also included sophisticated understanding of water-related health issues. Ship doctors, often men who had learned their trade through necessity rather than formal education, developed treatments for scurvy, dysentery, and other ailments that commonly affected crews suffering from poor water quality or inadequate water intake. They discovered that certain combinations of captured rum and contaminated water could create solutions that were safer to drink than either component alone. They learned to recognize the early signs of serious dehydration and developed forcing techniques for getting water into crew members who were too ill to drink voluntarily. The psychological aspects of pirate water management were perhaps the most sophisticated of any maritime culture. Pirates understood that maintaining crew morale during water shortages required not just equitable distribution, but the perception that the leadership was taking active steps to solve the problem. Successful pirate captains became masters of balancing honesty about dire situations with optimism about potential solutions. You're participating in one of these morale management sessions now. The captain has called the crew together to discuss the water situation honestly. Supplies are critically low, and the next known water source is still days away. But rather than simply announcing doom, he's outlining specific plans for emergency water collection, potential targets for water raids, and backup survival techniques. The crew leaves the meeting feeling informed and empowered rather than helpless. Time flows forward again, and we find ourselves in the mid-18th century aboard a British Royal Navy ship of the line, somewhere in the vast Pacific Ocean during one of Cook's voyages of exploration. The scale of these expeditions dwarfed anything previously attempted, voyages lasting years rather than months, carrying crews of hundreds rather than dozens, and venturing into waters so remote that resupply was impossible for vast stretches of time. You're standing in the ship's hold, surrounded by what represents the pinnacle of 18th century water storage technology. Massive oak barrels, some holding over 100 gallons each, stretch as far as you can see in the dim light filtering down from the deck above. But these aren't just larger versions of earlier storage systems. They represent centuries of accumulated engineering knowledge applied to the challenge of keeping hundreds of men alive during multi-year voyages. The Royal Navy had systematized water management in ways that earlier sailors could barely have imagined. Every aspect of water procurement, storage, treatment, and distribution was governed by detailed regulations developed through decades of experience and countless tragic mistakes. The Admiralty had learned that water management could determine the success or failure of entire expeditions, and they approached it with characteristic British thoroughness. Picture yourself watching the daily water distribution aboard this ship of the line. It's a ceremony that combines military precision with practical necessity. At precisely 8 bells in the morning watch, the ship's cooper, a skilled craftsman, whose expertise in barrel maintenance could mean the difference between success and disaster, appears with his measuring equipment. The rationing system is based on careful calculations that account for climate, expected voyage duration, crew size, and the physical demands of different duties aboard ship. Ordinary seamen receive 1 gallon per day for all purposes: drinking, cooking, and basic washing. Officers receive slightly more, not from privilege but because their decision-making responsibilities require them to maintain peak mental performance. But the Navy had also developed quality grading systems that allowed for more efficient use of stored water. Water was classified into categories: bright water that was crystal clear and fresh tasting, ordinary water that was still drinkable but perhaps developing slight odors or tastes, and cheese water that was beginning to spoil but could still be used for cooking or washing. You're tasting examples of each category now. The bright water is remarkable. Despite being stored for weeks in oak barrels, it tastes almost as fresh as water from a land-based well. The ordinary water has developed the characteristic woody taste of barrel storage, but it's still pleasant and refreshing. Even the cheese water, while it has an unpleasant smell and murky appearance, is still safe for cooking when boiled thoroughly. Naval innovations also included the first systematic use of water purification chemicals. Ships' surgeons had begun adding small amounts of various substances to water supplies to prevent spoilage and treat contamination. Vinegar was commonly used, not just for its preservative qualities, but because it provided vitamin C that helped prevent scurvy. Lime juice, the source of the term limey for British sailors, served similar purposes while making stored water more palatable. The most significant innovation of this period was the development of reliable water distillation equipment for shipboard use. The Royal Navy began installing copper stills on major vessels, allowing them to convert seawater into drinking water during emergencies. These weren't the crude, dangerous devices used by pirates, but sophisticated engineering, systems that could operate safely even during rough weather. Picture yourself operating one of these naval distillation units during a crisis. The ship's regular water supplies have been compromised by a leak that allowed tropical heat to spoil several barrels, and the crew is depending on the still to produce enough replacement water to reach the next landfall. The process requires constant attention, maintaining the proper fire temperature, monitoring the condensation rate, and ensuring that the precious distilled water is collected without contamination. The resulting water is pure but flat-tasting, lacking the minerals that make natural water satisfying. The ship's cook has learned to improve it by adding small amounts of stored fruit juices or wine, creating beverages that are both safe and reasonably pleasant to drink. British naval vessels also pioneered sophisticated rainwater collection systems that could gather and store thousands of gallons during tropical storms. These systems use the ship's sails as collection surfaces, with specially designed gutters and downspouts that could channel rainwater directly into storage barrels. The entire crew could mobilize within minutes to deploy these systems whenever rain appeared on the horizon. You're participating in one of these rainwater collection efforts during a sudden squall in the South Pacific. The crew works with practiced efficiency to position collection surfaces and guide the flow of precious fresh water into storage containers. The rain is coming down in torrents, and within an hour, the ship has collected enough water to extend its range by several weeks. But naval water management also had to address problems that merchant vessels rarely faced: the challenge of maintaining water discipline among large crews during extended voyages. With hundreds of men aboard ship for months or years at a time, preventing theft, waste, and hoarding of water supplies required constant vigilance and sophisticated management systems. The Navy developed elaborate security protocols around water storage areas. Access was restricted to specific crew members whose loyalty had been proven through years of service. Water supplies were regularly inspected and measured to detect any unauthorized consumption. Severe punishments, including flogging or even hanging, awaited anyone caught stealing water from the ship's stores. You're witnessing the daily water inspection now, watching as the ship's master examines each storage barrel for signs of tampering or deterioration. He tests samples from each container, checking for clarity, smell, and taste. Any barrel showing signs of contamination is immediately quarantined, and its contents either treated or discarded to prevent the spread of waterborne illness throughout the crew. Take a moment to subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying this peaceful journey through maritime history. We have many more historical sleep stories to explore together. Naval medicine had also advanced significantly by this period. Ship's surgeons understood the connection between water quality and crew health in ways that earlier maritime cultures had only guessed at. They maintained detailed logs of water consumption and health outcomes, developing treatment protocols for various water-related ailments. Scurvy prevention had become a systematic science rather than folk wisdom. Surgeons knew that adding citrus juice to water supplies could prevent the disease, and they carried sufficient quantities of lime juice to treat entire crews during long voyages. They also understood that certain combinations of stored water and alcohol could treat dysentery and other gastrointestinal problems common during extended sea voyages. The psychological aspects of naval water management were equally sophisticated. Officers learned that maintaining crew morale during water shortages required not just fair distribution, but active communication about water status and conservation efforts. Regular briefings kept crew members informed about water supplies and expected consumption rates, preventing the panic that could accompany uncertainty about survival prospects. You're attending one of these briefings now, listening as the captain explains the current water situation to the assembled crew. The ship is 3 months into what was planned as a 6-month voyage, and water consumption has been higher than expected due to unexpectedly hot weather in the tropics. But rather than simply announcing rationing, the captain is explaining the specific conservation measures being implemented and the expected timeline for reaching the next resupply point. Our journey now takes us into the vast Pacific Ocean, where we encounter some of history's most remarkable water management innovations developed by Polynesian navigators. You find yourself aboard a traditional voyaging canoe, perhaps with Tahitian sailors exploring new islands, or Hawaiian navigators maintaining trade routes across thousands of miles of open ocean. the Pacific presented unique challenges that Atlantic and Mediterranean sailors had never faced. Island cultures had to develop water storage and procurement techniques for voyages across vast distances where no land might be visible for weeks at a time. But they also had access to knowledge about tropical water sources and preservation techniques that European sailors were only beginning to discover. Picture yourself on a traditional Polynesian double-hulled voyaging canoe, constructed entirely from materials available on tropical islands but engineered with sophistication that rivals anything developed by European shipbuilders. The water storage system is a marvel of practical engineering disguised as simple craftsmanship. Water is stored in specially prepared gourds that have been selected and treated using techniques passed down through generations of ocean navigators. These aren't random containers, but carefully engineered vessels. The gourds are grown in specific ways to achieve optimal size and shape, then cured using smoking and oil treatment processes that make them watertight and resistant to cracking. During long voyages, you're examining one of these water gourds now, and the craftsmanship is remarkable. The surface has been polished smooth and treated with coconut oil that penetrates the gourd's wall, creating a barrier that prevents water loss while allowing the container to remain flexible during the temperature changes and physical stresses of ocean travel. Polynesian water management also included sophisticated understanding of water procurement from tropical sources that European sailors were just beginning to discover. Pacific Island navigators knew how to locate and collect fresh water from sources that would be invisible to untrained eyes. They had mastered the art of collecting water from banana plants and other tropical vegetation. During rain shortages, they could extract substantial quantities of drinking water from the hollow stems of certain plants, from the collected dew on large leaves, and even from the natural storage chambers found in some varieties of bamboo. You're learning these techniques now, watching as experienced navigators demonstrate how to extract water from a large banana plant. The process involves cutting the stem in specific ways that allow the plant's stored water to drain out slowly, providing several cups of clean, sweet-tasting liquid. The water tastes faintly of the plant but is refreshingly pure and satisfying. Pacific Islanders had also developed the most sophisticated coconut water utilization techniques in the world. They understood not just that young coconuts contained drinkable liquid, but exactly how to judge the age and condition of coconuts to maximize water yield and nutritional value. They knew which varieties of coconut trees produced the sweetest water, how to store coconuts during voyages to prevent spoilage, and how to open them efficiently to avoid waste. Picture yourself participating in this coconut water harvesting process. The navigator selects coconuts with the practiced eye of a connoisseur, tapping each one and listening to the sound to judge the quantity and quality of water inside. The opening process is an art form, using a specially shaped tool to create a clean hole that maximizes access while preventing contamination. The coconut water is sweet, refreshing, and surprisingly satisfying. It provides not just hydration, but electrolytes and nutrients that help maintain health during long voyages. The navigators have learned to ration coconut water carefully, using it to supplement rather than replace stored fresh water, making their supplies last longer while providing superior nutrition. Polynesian voyagers also pioneered the use of fermented beverages for long-distance water storage. They developed techniques for creating mildly alcoholic drinks from coconut water, fruit juices, and other island products that provided both hydration and nutrition while remaining safe to drink for extended periods. You're tasting one of these traditional fermented beverages now, a mixture of coconut water and breadfruit juice that has been allowed to ferment naturally for several days. The result is slightly effervescent and mildly alcoholic, with a complex sweet-sour taste that seems to quench thirst more effectively than plain water. The natural fermentation process has created beneficial bacteria that actually improve digestive health while preventing the growth of harmful microorganisms. Pacific Island water management also included rain collection techniques that were far more sophisticated than anything developed by European sailors. Island cultures had perfected the art of using woven mats, specially prepared bark cloth, and even carefully positioned leaves to collect and channel rainwater with remarkable efficiency. The collection systems could be deployed rapidly whenever clouds appeared on the horizon, and they could gather substantial quantities of water even from brief tropical showers. You're participating in this process now, helping to position traditional rain collection materials as a sudden squall approaches the voyaging canoe. The materials are surprisingly effective. Woven pandanus mats that have been treated with natural water-repelling substances that cause water to beat up and flow toward collection points rather than soaking into the mat itself. Within minutes of the rain beginning, clean fresh water is flowing into storage gourds at a rate that would be impressive even with modern equipment. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Polynesian water management was their understanding of emergency procurement techniques. Pacific navigators had developed methods for finding and collecting fresh water in situations where European sailors would have assumed none was available. They knew how to locate fresh water floating on the surface of the ocean. Lens-shaped bodies of rainwater that could persist for days after storms, floating on top of the denser saltwater. They could identify these freshwater lenses by subtle changes in wave patterns and surface color that would be invisible to untrained observers. You're experiencing this remarkable discovery now. The navigator has spotted what appears to be ordinary ocean surface, but closer examination reveals the subtle signs of a freshwater lens. Using a specially designed scoop, the crew carefully collects several gallons of water that tastes completely fresh, despite being surrounded by salt water. Pacific Islanders also understood how to create emergency stills using materials available on small islands or even aboard voyaging canoes. They could construct effective distillation equipment using hollowed gourds, woven baskets lined with natural waterproofing materials, and heat sources that could operate safely even on small boats. I'd love to know what you think about these incredible survival innovations. Have you ever tried any traditional water collection techniques yourself? Share your experiences in the comments. The social aspects of Polynesian water management were equally sophisticated. Pacific Island cultures had developed complex protocols for sharing water resources during group voyages and for managing water supplies during the establishment of new settlements on previously uninhabited islands. Water sharing wasn't just about survival, but about maintaining the social bonds that held voyaging groups together during months-long expeditions across trackless ocean. Elaborate ceremonies surrounded water distribution, and the sharing of water became a symbol of mutual trust and commitment among crew members. You're participating in one of these water-sharing ceremonies now. The day's water ration is distributed, not with the military precision of European naval vessels, but with ritual acknowledgments of mutual dependence and respect. Each person receives their allocation while offering thanks not just for the water itself, but for the successful cooperation that made the water's preservation possible. Our voyage through time brings us now to the late 18th and early 19th centuries, where you find yourself aboard ships that represent the convergence of traditional maritime wisdom with emerging scientific understanding. This is the era when water management began to transform from art and tradition into systematic science. You're standing in the laboratory of a British Royal Navy ship during one of the great scientific expeditions of the age, perhaps accompanying Captain Cook on his second voyage or sailing with Charles Darwin aboard the Beagle. The ship carries not just sailors and officers, but naturalists, chemists, and physicians who are applying scientific methods to age-old problems of maritime survival. The laboratory is cramped, but remarkably well equipped for its time. Glass, vessels, copper distillation equipment, and primitive chemical testing apparatus crowd the small space. But this equipment represents a revolution in understanding how to keep water safe and drinkable during long voyages. For the first time in maritime history, ships' physicians could actually test water quality using chemical methods rather than relying solely on taste, smell, and appearance. They could detect contamination levels, measure salt content in supposedly fresh water, and even identify specific types of harmful bacteria using early microscopic techniques. You're watching one of these scientific water tests now. The ship's naturalist carefully measures samples of water from different storage containers, adding various chemical reagents and observing the results. Some samples remain clear, indicating good quality water. Others develop cloudiness or color changes that reveal contamination or deterioration that wouldn't have been obvious through simple sensory examination. This scientific approach led to systematic improvements in water treatment and storage. Ship's chemists began adding carefully measured quantities of various substances to water supplies, not based on tradition or guesswork, but on controlled experiments that demonstrated measurable improvements in water preservation. Iodine had been discovered and its antiseptic properties recognized, leading to the first use of chemical water purification aboard ships. A few drops of iodine solution could render questionable water safe to drink, providing a reliable method for treating water obtained from uncertain sources during emergency resupply stops. You're experiencing this iodine treatment process now. Water collected from a tropical stream during a brief landfall has been treated with precisely measured amounts of iodine solution. The treated water has a slight medicinal taste and a faint, yellow tinge, but testing confirms that harmful microorganisms have been destroyed. It's safe to drink and will remain so even after extended storage. Scientific expeditions also pioneered systematic record-keeping about water consumption and health outcomes. Ship's doctors maintained detailed logs tracking the relationship between water quality, consumption rates, and crew health. These records became the foundation for evidence-based improvements in maritime water management. The data revealed patterns that earlier sailors had only suspected. Crews that maintained consistent water intake showed significantly lower rates of scurvy and other nutritional diseases. Water stored in certain types of containers remained fresh longer than water in others. Specific treatment methods proved more effective than others at preventing water-related illnesses. You're helping to maintain these scientific records now, carefully recording daily water consumption for each crew member along with observations about their health and performance. The data shows clear correlations between adequate hydration and resistance to tropical diseases, information that will eventually save thousands of lives on future voyages. The scientific revolution also brought improvements in water distillation technology. Steam engines, originally developed for propulsion, could also power efficient distillation equipment that could convert seawater to fresh water on an industrial scale. For the first time, ships could produce their own drinking water rather than depending entirely on stored supplies. Picture yourself operating one of these early steam-powered distillation units. Coal or wood fires heat large boilers that produce steam, which is then condensed back into pure water using copper cooling coils. The process is much more efficient than earlier distillation methods, capable of producing hundreds of gallons of fresh water per day, even while the ship continues sailing. The distilled water is completely pure but lacks the minerals that make natural water satisfying to drink. Ship's chemists learned to improve it by adding controlled amounts of salt and other minerals, creating water that was both safe and pleasant to consume. Scientific understanding also revolutionized emergency water procurement. Naturalists aboard exploration vessels cataloged hundreds of tropical plants that could provide drinking water, creating field guides that future sailors could use to locate water sources on unfamiliar islands. They documented which varieties of bamboo stored water, how to identify trees that could be tapped for sap, and which fruits contained sufficient liquid to serve as emergency water sources. This knowledge transformed brief landfalls from desperate searches for obvious water sources into systematic surveys that could locate hidden water reserves. You're participating in one of these scientific water surveys now, accompanying the ship's botanist as he examines the vegetation on a small Pacific island. Using systematic observation and testing methods, he's identifying several plants that could provide emergency water supplies. Some store rainwater in natural reservoirs. Others can be processed to extract substantial quantities of potable liquid. The survey reveals that this apparently barren island actually contains enough water sources to supply a large crew for several weeks. Information that's carefully recorded for future reference by other vessels that might need emergency supplies. Scientific expeditions also developed improved methods for detecting and treating waterborne diseases. Ship's physicians could now identify cholera, dysentery, and other water-related illnesses in their early stages, and implement treatment protocols based on scientific understanding rather than traditional remedies. They learned that certain combinations of medicines and treated water could cure illnesses that had previously been fatal. They developed protocols for quarantining crew members with waterborne diseases to prevent epidemics from spreading throughout the ship. Most importantly, they established connections between water quality and disease prevention that led to systematic improvements in water management practices. Take a moment to let me know in the comments what you think of these scientific advances. It's amazing how much innovation came from the simple need to stay hydrated at sea. The social implications of scientific water management were equally significant. As ships became more reliable and voyages more predictable, the extreme rationing and desperate conservation measures of earlier eras began to give way to more humane water management practices. Scientific understanding of human hydration needs led to more generous and more flexible rationing systems. Rather than the rigid daily allowances of earlier periods, water distribution could be adjusted based on scientific understanding of individual needs, climate conditions, and work requirements. You're experiencing this more humane approach now. Instead of receiving a fixed daily ration regardless of circumstances, your water allocation is adjusted based on the day's weather conditions, your specific work assignments, and even your individual health status as monitored by the ship's physician. The result is a water management system that maintains adequate supplies for survival while treating crew members as individuals with varying needs rather than identical units consuming identical rations. It's a fundamental shift toward recognizing the scientific complexity of human hydration while maintaining the discipline necessary for successful long-distance voyages. Time advances again, and we find ourselves in the mid-19th century aboard one of the great steamships that were revolutionizing ocean travel. You're no longer dependent on wind and weather for propulsion, and this mechanical reliability has transformed every aspect of shipboard life, including water management. Picture yourself aboard a transatlantic steamship, perhaps one of the great. Packet ships carrying passengers and mail between Europe and America on predictable schedules that earlier sailors could never have maintained. The ship represents the marriage of traditional maritime knowledge with industrial-age engineering, creating possibilities for water management that previous generations couldn't have imagined. The most obvious change is scale. Steam-powered vessels could carry vastly larger water supplies than wind-powered ships because they weren't limited by the space and weight restrictions that had constrained earlier vessels. Massive iron tanks, riveted and sealed using industrial techniques, could store thousands of gallons of fresh water in spaces that would have been impossible to waterproof using traditional methods. You're examining these industrial water storage systems now, walking through hold spaces filled with enormous metal tanks that dwarf the largest barrels used on sailing ships. Each tank is a marvel of 19th century engineering, iron plates riveted together with precision, sealed with gaskets made from new rubber compounds, and fitted with valves and gauges that allow precise monitoring of water levels and quality. But the real revolution was in water production. Steam engines required enormous quantities of fresh water for their boilers, and this need drove the development of efficient desalination equipment that could convert seawater into the pure water needed for both mechanical and human consumption. For the first time in maritime history, ships could produce unlimited fresh water as long as their fuel supplies lasted. The desalination process aboard steam vessels was an impressive industrial operation. Massive boilers heated seawater to steam, which was then condensed back into pure water using complex systems of copper pipes and cooling chambers. The process was continuous and efficient, capable of producing thousands of gallons of distilled water per day. You're observing this industrial desalination process now, watching as seawater is pumped into the system and emerges as pure, clean drinking water. The scale is remarkable. What earlier sailors achieved drop by drop using primitive stills, this industrial system produces by the ton. The engine room fills with the sound of pumps, boilers, and condensers working in mechanical harmony to transform the ocean's limitless salt water into life-sustaining fresh water. The improved water availability fundamentally changed shipboard life. For the first time, sailors could wash regularly, cook with abundant fresh water, and even enjoy the luxury of hot water for beverages and food preparation. The chronic water discipline that had dominated maritime culture for thousands of years began to relax aboard steam-powered vessels. You're experiencing this newfound water abundance firsthand. Instead of the carefully measured rations that defined earlier voyages, you have access to wash basins filled with hot, fresh water, meals prepared with generous quantities of clean water, and even the luxury of coffee and tea made with properly heated, properly treated water. But industrial water management also introduced new challenges and complexities. The mechanical systems required constant maintenance and skilled operation. Boiler explosions could destroy not just the ship's propulsion, but its entire water production capability. Coal consumption had to be balanced against water production needs, creating new types of resource management problems. Steam-era ships also carried passengers in unprecedented numbers, creating water management challenges that earlier vessels had never faced. A single transatlantic steamer might carry several hundred passengers along with its crew, requiring water management systems that could serve populations equivalent to small towns. The passenger accommodations reflected this industrial scale. Water management. First-class passengers enjoyed private staterooms with running water, flush toilets, and even bathing facilities that would have been unimaginable aboard earlier vessels. Steerage passengers received more basic accommodations, but even they had access to far more water than would have been available to anyone aboard sailing ships. You're touring these passenger accommodations now, marveling at the transformation that industrial water management had brought to ocean travel. The contrast with earlier maritime conditions is striking. What had once been a desperate struggle for survival had become, for those who could afford it, a relatively comfortable means of transportation. Industrial-era ships also pioneered systematic water treatment and quality control. Steam-powered pumps could force water through filtration systems that removed impurities and improved taste. Chemical treatment could ensure that stored water remained fresh and safe throughout long voyages. Quality control testing could detect problems before they affected passenger health and comfort. The treatment systems were impressive examples of 19th-century engineering applied to age-old problems. Water passed through multiple stages of filtration, from coarse screens that removed obvious debris to fine sand and charcoal filters that eliminated microscopic impurities. Chemical additives controlled bacterial growth, while mineral supplements improved taste and nutritional value. You're sampling water that has been processed through these industrial treatment systems, and the difference is remarkable. The water is clean, clear, and refreshing, free from the woody tastes of barrel storage or the flat flavor of simple distillation. It tastes almost identical to the best municipal water supplies available on land, representing a complete transformation in maritime water quality. The social implications of abundant water were equally significant. The rigid class distinctions that had always characterized shipboard life became even more pronounced when water availability varied dramatically between passenger classes. First-class passengers enjoyed water luxury that approached land-based standards, while steerage passengers received basic but adequate water services. But even steerage passengers aboard industrial-era ships enjoyed water security that surpassed the conditions experienced by officers aboard earlier vessels. The transformation was so complete that within a generation, the desperate water conservation measures that had dominated maritime culture for millennia became historical curiosities rather than daily necessities. Industrial water management also enabled new types of maritime enterprises. Passenger ships could maintain predictable schedules because they weren't dependent on finding water during voyages. Cargo vessels could carry larger crews and undertake longer voyages without risking water shortages. Naval vessels could maintain stations far from friendly ports because they could produce their own water supplies. I'm curious about your thoughts on this industrial transformation. How do you think abundant water availability changed the experience of ocean travel? Share your perspective in the comments below. The medical implications were equally revolutionary. Ships' physicians could now use unlimited quantities of clean water for surgical procedures, wound cleaning, and general sanitation. Hospital facilities. aboard passenger ships rivaled those available in major cities, with hot and cold running water, steam sterilization equipment, and sanitary conditions that would have been impossible to maintain aboard earlier vessels. You're visiting the ship's hospital now, observing medical procedures that demonstrate the revolutionary impact of abundant clean water. Surgical instruments are sterilized using steam, wounds are cleaned with unlimited quantities of hot water, and patients can be kept clean and comfortable in ways that earlier maritime medicine couldn't have provided. The contrast with earlier maritime medical care is striking. Where previous ships' surgeons had to choose between using precious water for drinking or for medical procedures, industrial-era physicians could use whatever quantities they needed for optimal patient care. This single change probably saved more lives than any other medical advancement of the period. Our journey through time brings us now to the 20th century, where you find yourself aboard vessels that represent the culmination of thousands of years of maritime water management evolution. From luxury ocean liners to military vessels to research ships, 20th century maritime technology had solved virtually every water-related challenge that had confronted earlier sailors. Picture yourself aboard the RMS Titanic during its brief maiden voyage in 1912. The ship represents the absolute pinnacle of early 20th century maritime engineering, with water management systems that were more sophisticated than those found in most land-based cities of the time. The scale is almost incomprehensible compared to earlier vessels. The Titanic's water systems could store and process tens of thousands of gallons of fresh water, enough to supply a city of several thousand people. Multiple redundant systems ensured that water would be available even if primary systems failed. The engineering represented centuries of accumulated maritime knowledge combined with the latest industrial technology. You're touring the ship's water treatment facilities, and they occupy entire rooms in the lower decks. Massive pumps driven by electric motors can process seawater at rates that dwarf anything achieved by earlier technology. Multiple distillation units operate continuously, producing pure water for drinking, cooking, bathing, and the ship's steam engines. The passenger accommodations reflect this abundant water availability. Even third-class passengers have access to running water, flush toilets, and washing facilities that would have seemed miraculous to travelers of previous generations. First-class passengers enjoy luxury that rivals the finest hotels on land, with hot and cold running water, private bathrooms, and even swimming pools filled with heated seawater. But the 20th century also brought new challenges and new solutions to maritime water management. Military vessels during both World Wars faced unique problems as they operated in hostile environments where traditional resupply was impossible and where battle damage could destroy water systems in minutes. World War II submarines pioneered some of the most advanced water recycling and conservation systems ever developed. Operating submerged for weeks at a time, submarine crews had to survive on strictly limited water supplies while maintaining peak performance under extreme stress conditions. Picture yourself aboard a German U-boat prowling the Atlantic in 1943. Space is extremely limited, and every system must serve multiple purposes. The water management system is a marvel of compact engineering. Multiple small storage tanks distributed throughout the submarine, efficient distillation equipment that operates on minimal power, and recycling systems that reclaim water from every possible source. The psychological challenges of submarine water management were as demanding as the technical ones. Crews had to maintain strict water discipline while living in cramped conditions under constant stress. The submarine's water officer, and often one of the most trusted members of the crew, controlled access to water supplies with authority that could mean the difference between successful missions and disasters. You're experiencing submarine water rationing now, receiving your daily allocation of carefully measured drinking water while knowing that waste or carelessness could endanger the entire crew. The water tastes flat and metallic from the distillation process and storage in metal containers, but it represents life itself in the underwater environment where natural water sources are completely inaccessible. Submarine crews also pioneered advanced water recycling techniques that recovered moisture from breathing air, condensation from equipment, and even humidity from cooking and washing. These systems could extend water supplies significantly, allowing submarines to remain submerged longer and operate farther from friendly bases. The technology was remarkably sophisticated for its time. Air conditioning systems captured moisture from the submarine's atmosphere and channeled it into storage tanks. Condensation from the submarine's cooling systems was collected and purified for drinking. Even water vapor from cooking was captured and recycled back into the supply system. Post-war maritime development brought even more advanced water management systems. Nuclear-powered vessels could operate indefinitely without refueling, making them capable of voyages limited only by food supplies and crew endurance. The unlimited power available from nuclear reactors enabled desalination systems that could produce virtually unlimited quantities of fresh water. You're now aboard a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, observing water production systems that process thousands of gallons per hour. The scale is industrial. Massive distillation plants that could supply entire cities operate continuously, powered by nuclear reactors that provide unlimited energy for water production. The crew of several thousand people enjoys water availability that exceeds what's available in many land-based communities. Hot showers, laundries, kitchens, and even recreational facilities use water quantities that would have been unimaginable to earlier generations of sailors. The chronic water scarcity that defined maritime life for thousands of years has been completely eliminated aboard these modern vessels. Modern commercial shipping also achieved remarkable advances in water management efficiency. Container ships, oil tankers, and bulk carriers operating on global routes carry sophisticated water treatment and production equipment that ensures crew comfort during voyages that may last months without port calls. The automation of these systems means that water production and distribution require minimal crew attention, allowing sailors to focus on navigation, cargo handling, and ship maintenance rather than the constant water management tasks that consumed so much effort aboard earlier vessels. You're observing these automated systems now, watching as computerized controls monitor water quality, adjust production, rates based on consumption patterns, and even predict maintenance needs before problems develop. The contrast with the manual water management of earlier eras is remarkable. What once required constant human attention now operates with minimal intervention. Take a moment to reflect on this incredible journey we've taken together, from ancient sailors carefully rationing every drop to modern crews with unlimited water access. If you're enjoying this exploration, please subscribe for more historical sleep journeys. Modern maritime water management also addressed environmental concerns that earlier generations never considered. Advanced treatment systems ensure that water discharge from ships meets environmental standards, preventing ocean pollution while maintaining operational efficiency. The technology includes biological treatment systems that remove harmful substances, filtration equipment that prevents the discharge of plastics and other pollutants, and monitoring systems that ensure compliance with international environmental regulations. Research vessels operating in pristine environments like Antarctica use closed-loop water systems that prevent any contamination of the surrounding environment while providing crew members with all the fresh water they need for extended scientific missions. You're aboard one of these research vessels, now observing water systems that are designed to have zero environmental impact while supporting scientific operations in some of the world's most remote and fragile ecosystems. The technology represents the ultimate evolution of maritime water management, systems that provide abundant, clean water while preserving the ocean environment for future generations. As our historical journey draws toward its close, let's pause to reflect on the remarkable story of human ingenuity we've witnessed. You've traveled through time from ancient Phoenician traders to modern research vessels, experiencing firsthand how our ancestors solved one of survival's most fundamental challenges. Picture yourself now in a quiet moment aboard a modern vessel, perhaps during the peaceful hours of the middle watch, when the ocean stretches endlessly in all directions under a canopy of stars. The gentle hum of automated water production systems provides a soothing background to your contemplation of the extraordinary journey humanity has taken to master the challenge of staying alive on the water. The story we've experienced together reveals patterns that echo across all human endeavor: innovation born from necessity, wisdom accumulated through countless generations of trial and error, the gradual transformation of desperate survival techniques into routine comfort and convenience. Most remarkably, we've seen how the fundamental human need for water drove technological and social developments that shaped entire civilizations. Consider the Phoenicians, who first systematized water storage and rationing, creating maritime practices that influenced naval operations for the next 3,000 years. Their innovations weren't just practical solutions but foundational principles that every subsequent maritime culture would build upon. The understanding that water was the ultimate currency at sea became a driving force for exploration, trade, and empire building that changed the course of human history. The Romans brought their characteristic engineering precision to water management, creating systems that were more sophisticated than many modern cities. Their understanding that alcohol could preserve water while adding calories was a breakthrough that saved countless lives during the empire's maritime expansion. More importantly, they demonstrated that systematic approaches to water management could enable reliable long-distance commerce and military operations. Viking innovations showed us how maritime cultures adapted to harsh northern environments, developing flexible techniques for finding and collecting water from sources that Mediterranean sailors never encountered. Their psychological approaches to water management during voyages into unknown territories established principles of leadership and morale that remain relevant today. Medieval monastery ships revealed how spiritual frameworks could enhance practical water management, turning daily rationing from a reminder of scarcity into opportunities for gratitude and community building. Their water treatment techniques, disguised as religious rituals, achieved purification results that wouldn't be scientifically understood for centuries. The age of exploration pushed water management to its absolute limits, enabling voyages of unprecedented length and ambition. Portuguese and Spanish innovations in storage and preservation made possible the maritime expeditions that connected the world's continents and fundamentally altered human civilization. Pirates, operating outside conventional maritime support systems, developed the most creative and desperate water procurement techniques in history. Their innovations in recycling, opportunistic collection, and emergency survival showed how extreme necessity could drive remarkable ingenuity. The golden age of sail brought systematic naval approaches that transformed water management from art into science. British naval innovations in storage, treatment, and distribution enabled the global maritime operations that shaped the modern world. Pacific Island cultures contributed knowledge that European sailors took generations to discover. Independently, their understanding of tropical water sources, coconut utilization, and natural storage techniques provided sustainable solutions that worked in harmony with ocean environments. The scientific revolution applied rational investigation to age-old problems, creating evidence-based improvements that saved thousands of lives. Chemical water treatment, systematic record-keeping, and industrial-scale distillation transformed maritime water management from traditional practice into modern technology. The industrial age brought abundant water to ocean travel for the first time in human history. Steam-powered desalination and massive storage systems eliminated the chronic water scarcity that had defined maritime life for millennia, enabling new forms of ocean commerce and travel. The 20th century completed this transformation, creating maritime water systems more sophisticated than those found in most land-based communities. From luxury liners to military submarines to research vessels, modern ships achieved complete mastery over the water challenges that had claimed countless lives throughout maritime history. As we near the end of our journey through maritime history, let yourself sink deeper into the gentle rhythm of the waves that have carried us across centuries of human experience. The ocean that surrounds us now is the same ocean that challenged ancient Phoenician traders, Roman grain ships, Viking explorers, and all the countless sailors whose stories we've shared tonight. The water itself connects every era of our journey. The molecules that quenched the thirst of medieval pilgrims might flow past our hull right now. The rain that filled Viking water casks 1,000 years ago could fall on our deck tonight. Water moves in endless cycles between sea and sky, connecting past and present in patterns that make every drop sacred with history. Picture yourself standing at the ship's rail now, watching moonlight dance on waves that stretch to every horizon. The gentle phosphorescence in the water's wake reminds you that the ocean is alive with countless microscopic organisms, the foundation of life, chains that ultimately support all maritime existence. This same luminescence guided ancient navigators, provided wonder for medieval sailors, and continues to inspire modern mariners. The techniques we've explored tonight reveal something profound about human nature itself. Faced with the fundamental challenge of survival, our ancestors didn't simply accept limitations, but consistently found ways to transcend them. Every innovation we've witnessed, from Phoenician amphorae to nuclear-powered desalination, represents human creativity, applied to life's most basic necessity. Consider how the simple need for drinking water drove developments in pottery, metallurgy, chemistry, engineering, psychology, and social organization. The quest to stay hydrated at sea contributed to advances in nearly every field of human knowledge. Navigation techniques improved because sailors needed to find land-based water sources. Medical knowledge advanced because water-related diseases threatened maritime operations. Even social hierarchies and legal systems evolved partly around the fair distribution of water during long voyages. The psychological aspects of water management reveal equally important truths about human nature. Throughout our journey, we've seen how successful maritime cultures learn to balance honest acknowledgement of dangers with maintaining hope and morale. Leaders who could manage both water supplies and crew psychology achieved success, where those who focused on only one aspect often failed. The rituals and ceremonies surrounding water distribution weren't merely practical arrangements, but sophisticated social technologies that maintained group cohesion during extreme stress. Whether it was Phoenician loading ceremonies, Roman rationing protocols, or Polynesian sharing rituals, successful maritime cultures understood that water management was as much about human psychology as physical survival. These lessons extend far beyond maritime history. The principles our ancestors developed for managing scarce water resources, careful planning, equitable distribution, creative problem-solving, community cooperation, and psychological resilience, apply to virtually every challenge humanity faces. Climate change, resource depletion, social inequality, and technological disruption all require the same combination of practical innovation and social wisdom that enabled our maritime ancestors to survive and thrive in harsh ocean environments. The skills they developed for turning saltwater into drinking water mirror the creativity we need for transforming contemporary challenges into opportunities. Let your breathing slow naturally as you contemplate these connections between past and present. The gentle sounds of water against the hull create a rhythm that has soothed countless sailors throughout history. The same sound provided comfort to anxious Phoenician merchants, exhausted Roman crews, determined Viking explorers, and hopeful pilgrims crossing medieval seas. The ocean's voice speaks in the same language it used to communicate with our ancestors. The patterns of waves, the rhythm of swells, the whisper of wind across water, these remain unchanged despite all the technological advances we've witnessed. In this constancy, we find connection to every sailor who has ever depended on the sea for life and livelihood. I'd love to know which period of maritime history resonated most strongly with you tonight. Was it the desperate innovations of pirate crews, the systematic approaches of Roman engineers, or perhaps the sustainable wisdom of Pacific Island cultures? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective might inspire our next historical journey together. The story of maritime water management also reveals humanity's relationship with nature itself. Early sailors worked within natural limitations, using wind patterns, rainfall cycles, and seasonal changes to their advantage. Later technological developments allowed increasingly complete control over water supplies, but often at the cost of environmental harmony. Modern maritime water management represents a synthesis of these approaches: advanced technology applied with environmental consciousness, abundant water supplies managed with awareness of ecological impact. This evolution mirrors humanity's broader journey toward understanding our place in natural systems. As you rest comfortably tonight, consider that you're participating in the same fundamental relationship with water that has sustained human life throughout our species' existence. The water in your body follows the same chemical and biological processes that kept ancient sailors alive during desperate ocean crossings. Your cells depend on the same hydration principles that determine success or failure for maritime expeditions throughout history. The 8 glasses of water you might drink today represent security that billions of our ancestors could never have imagined. The hot shower you might enjoy tomorrow morning would have seemed miraculous to sailors who rationed every drop for months at a time, yet the underlying human need remains unchanged. We are still the same creatures who require clean water for survival, health, and comfort. Allow yourself to drift now into the dreamlike space between waking consciousness and peaceful sleep, carried by the gentle rhythm of waves that have cradled human dreams for as long as people have ventured onto the ocean. The boundary between sea and sky dissolves in the soft darkness, just as the boundaries between past and present blur in. The timeless realm of maritime experience. Picture yourself floating in a space where all the water stories we've shared tonight converge into a single, flowing narrative. Ancient amphorae drift past like ceramic dreams, their clay surfaces worn smooth by centuries of faithful service. Roman barrels roll gently through liquid space, still holding the whispered prayers of sailors who trusted their lives to oak and iron hoops. Viking water casks bob in the ethereal current, their wood bearing the marks of northern seas and the dreams of explorers who sailed beyond the edge of known worlds. Medieval water vessels flow past in stately procession, glazed pottery that gleams with monastery blessings, leather containers that speak of pilgrimage and faith, silver cups that reflect moonlight gathered from 1,000 nights at sea. The water itself becomes visible as streams of liquid light, flowing between vessels and through time, connecting every sailor who ever lifted cup to lips in gratitude for life-sustaining moisture. You can see the molecular dance that transforms seawater into vapor, vapor into clouds, clouds into rain, and rain into the precious fresh water that filled our ancestors' containers. In this dreamlike space, the wisdom of ages flows like water itself. Phoenician knowledge mingles with Roman engineering, Viking innovation merges with Islamic science, and Portuguese exploration techniques blend with Polynesian traditional wisdom. The boundaries between cultures dissolve just as salt dissolves in water, creating solutions more powerful than their individual components. You're drinking now from a cup that contains water from every era of our journey. It tastes of clay from ancient amphora, oak from medieval barrels, and the metallic purity of modern distillation. But mostly it tastes of human ingenuity, the accumulated wisdom of countless generations who refused to accept limitations and consistently found ways to transform challenges into triumphs. The liquid in your dream cup carries more than water, molecules. It holds the dissolved hopes of desperate sailors, the concentrated prayers of storm-tossed crews, the distilled wisdom of navigators who read survival in star patterns and wave formations. Each sip connects you to every human who ever faced the ocean's challenges with creativity, courage, and determination. Float deeper now into the liquid realm where maritime dreams are born. Here, the ocean reveals its secrets not through struggle, but through gentle revelation. You understand without learning how to read weather patterns and wave formations, how to find fresh water in seemingly barren landscapes, how to make precious supplies last through careful management and community cooperation. The water spirits of all maritime cultures dance around you in the liquid space. Phoenician sea gods who blessed trading voyages, Roman Neptune who protected grain ships, Norse sea goddesses who guided Viking explorers, and Polynesian ocean deities who taught sustainable relationships with marine environments. They offer not supernatural powers, but natural wisdom. The understanding that survival comes through harmony with ocean rhythms rather than opposition to them. In your dream, you possess the accumulated water wisdom of all maritime history. You know instinctively how to judge the quality of stored water by subtle changes in color and smell. You understand how to calculate rationing schedules that balance immediate needs with long-term survival. You can sense the presence of fresh water sources using knowledge that our ancestors developed through centuries of desperate necessity. But most importantly, you understand the social and psychological dimensions of water management that determine success or failure for maritime communities. You know how to maintain morale during shortages, how to distribute limited resources fairly, and how to inspire cooperation when survival depends on collective effort. These human skills matter more than any technological innovation. The dream deepens, and you find yourself swimming in an ocean composed entirely of stories. Each drop of water contains a complete narrative: desperate pirates recycling contaminated water, medieval monks blessing daily rations, Roman engineers testing preservation techniques, Polynesian navigators teaching coconut water harvesting to their children. Take a moment to subscribe to our channel if you're finding peace in these historical journeys. We have many more stories to explore together in future videos. The stories flow around and through you, their wisdom becoming part of your understanding, without effort or study. You absorb the patience of sailors who made tiny water rations last for weeks, the creativity of crews who found drinking water in impossible circumstances, and the leadership skills of captains who maintained crew survival through fair water management practices. In the liquid dream space, you experience the joy of rain after weeks of rationing, the relief of discovering a freshwater spring on a seemingly barren island, and the satisfaction of successfully completing a long voyage with water supplies intact. These emotional experiences, repeated countless times throughout maritime history, become part of your own memory and wisdom. The ocean of stories also carries the weight of maritime water tragedies: ships that ran out of water days from port, crews that perished from thirst within sight of land, and expeditions that failed because their water management systems couldn't meet the challenges they faced. These sorrowful stories teach respect for water's importance and appreciation for the innovations that make modern maritime travel safe and comfortable. But even the tragic stories ultimately contribute to human wisdom. Every failure taught lessons that prevented future disasters. Every innovation that didn't work cleared the path for approaches that did succeed. The accumulated knowledge of maritime water management represents humanity's ability to learn from both success and failure, gradually developing solutions that transcend individual limitations. Float now in the gentle current of liquid history, letting the rhythm of waves across centuries carry you toward peaceful rest. The same ocean that challenged ancient sailors provides comfort tonight, its endless motion a lullaby that has soothed maritime dreams since humans first ventured beyond sight of land. As our long voyage through maritime history draws toward its peaceful conclusion, feel yourself gradually returning from the depths of time to the gentle present moment. The wisdom you've gathered during our journey together becomes part of your own understanding, settling into your consciousness like sediment in still water, creating a foundation of knowledge that will remain long after tonight's exploration ends. You're returning now to your own comfortable space, but you carry with you the accumulated experience of centuries. The desperate resourcefulness of ancient sailors, the systematic innovations of Roman engineers, the creative solutions of medieval navigators, and the technological mastery of modern mariners all become part of your perspective on human potential and resilience. The transition from historical immersion back to present awareness is as gentle as evening waves reaching a peaceful shore. Each breath brings you closer to your own time, while maintaining connection to the timeless wisdom we've discovered together. The rhythm of your breathing matches the eternal rhythm of tides that have measured time for countless generations of maritime travelers. In this peaceful space between sleep and waking, between past and present, consider how the lessons of maritime water management apply to your own daily life. The patience that enabled ancient sailors to make tiny rations last for weeks can help you appreciate the abundance that surrounds you now. The creativity that drove desperate innovations during water shortages can inspire solutions to contemporary challenges. The leadership skills that successful captains used to maintain crew morale during shortages apply to any situation where resources are limited and cooperation is essential. The scientific curiosity that drove 18th century naval innovations can guide your approach to learning and problem solving in any field. Most importantly, The respect for water that permeated every maritime culture we've visited can deepen your appreciation for one of life's most essential gifts. Every glass of clean drinking water you enjoy connects you to the struggles and triumphs of countless ancestors who literally risked their lives to obtain what you now access effortlessly. Let this appreciation settle gently into your consciousness, not as guilt for your advantages, but as gratitude for the accumulated wisdom and innovation that make modern comfort possible. The hot shower you'll enjoy tomorrow morning represents the culmination of thousands of years of human ingenuity applied to water management challenges. The municipal water systems that deliver clean water to your home incorporate lessons learned through centuries of maritime experimentation with storage, treatment, and distribution. The chemical treatments that ensure water safety descend directly from techniques first developed aboard ships where contaminated water meant death for entire crews. As you rest tonight, your body processes water using the same biological mechanisms that sustained ancient Phoenician traders, Roman sailors, Viking explorers, and all the maritime ancestors whose stories we've shared. The cellular processes that maintain your hydration follow patterns established millions of years before humans ever ventured onto the ocean, yet refined through evolutionary pressures that included the challenges of maritime survival. The water in your body tonight might have fallen as rain on Viking longships, flowed through Roman aqueducts, or filled medieval monastery cisterns. The endless cycle of evaporation and precipitation means that you share molecular connections with every human who ever lived, but especially with those who understood water's preciousness through direct experience of scarcity. Feel yourself settling more deeply into comfortable rest, supported by the accumulated wisdom of maritime history and connected to the endless flow of human experience across time. The gentle sound of your breathing joins the eternal rhythm of waves that has provided comfort to countless sailors during long, dark nights at sea. Your dreams tonight might carry you back to any of the historical periods we've visited, perhaps. You'll find yourself helping to load water amphorae aboard a Phoenician trading vessel, or participating in the daily water distribution ceremony aboard a medieval pilgrimage ship, or watching the miracle of fresh water flowing from a steam-powered distillation system. Whatever dreams come, they'll be enriched by the understanding that you're part of an unbroken chain of human experience stretching back to the first sailors who ventured beyond sight of land. Your peaceful rest tonight is enabled by the same biological processes that sustained our maritime ancestors, and your comfort is made possible by their accumulated innovations and wisdom. Let me know in the comments where you'd like our next historical journey to take us. Perhaps we'll explore how ancient civilizations preserved food during long expeditions, or discover the navigation techniques that guided ships across trackless oceans, or investigate the medical practices that kept crews healthy during months-long voyages. The ocean of human history contains infinite stories of survival, innovation, and triumph over seemingly impossible challenges. Tonight we've explored just one small portion of this vast sea of experience, but the patterns we've discovered, human creativity applied to fundamental challenges, wisdom accumulated through generations of trial and error, and the transformation of desperate necessity into comfortable routine, appear throughout human history. As you drift towards sleep, carry with you the confidence that humans have always found ways to overcome challenges that initially seemed insurmountable. The same creativity that enabled ancient sailors to survive months at sea with limited water supplies flows through you, ready to be applied to whatever challenges you might face. The same community cooperation that enabled successful water management aboard crowded ships can guide your interactions with family, friends, and colleagues. The same patient planning that made long voyages possible can help you achieve your own long-term goals. The same respect for essential resources that characterize successful maritime cultures can enhance your relationship with the natural world. Picture yourself now aboard a whaling vessel in the 1840s, pushing through the ice-choked waters of the Arctic Ocean. The temperature has dropped to 20 degrees below zero, and the familiar challenges of maritime water management have taken on an entirely new dimension. Here, in the planet's most unforgiving maritime environment, sailors developed some of the most ingenious water procurement and preservation techniques in maritime history. You're watching the crew chip away at a massive iceberg that towers beside your ship like a frozen cathedral. This isn't seawater ice, which would be too salty to drink, but ancient freshwater ice, compressed over thousands of years into the purest water source available in these desolate regions. The crew knows how to identify the difference by color and clarity, knowledge that could mean the difference between life and death during Arctic expeditions. The process of harvesting ice becomes an art form in these conditions. Experienced Arctic sailors can distinguish between different types of ice by subtle variations in appearance. Old compressed ice from glaciers and ancient icebergs contains virtually no salt and melts into pure drinking water. Newer sea ice, formed from frozen salt water, requires special treatment to extract the salt that becomes concentrated in pockets within the ice structure. You're participating in the ice harvest now, wielding heavy tools to break away chunks of the precious frozen water. The work is exhausting in the extreme cold, but the crew maintains steady rhythm because they know this ice represents their water security for weeks or months ahead. Each piece must be carefully selected. Experienced Arctic hands can judge the salt content of ice by its color, texture, and the way it fractures under tools. The ship's cook demonstrates the technique for processing sea ice, a skill that separated successful Arctic expeditions from disasters. Sea ice can't simply be melted and consumed. The salt concentration would cause severe dehydration and illness. Instead, the cook uses a careful washing process, repeatedly melting small amounts of ice and discarding the first water that runs off, which contains most of the concentrated salt. Watch as he demonstrates the ice washing technique that saved countless lives during Arctic exploration. He melts a chunk of sea ice in a large pot, then immediately pours off the first liquid that forms, which appears cloudy with salt and impurities. The remaining ice is melted more slowly, producing water that's clean enough to drink but still carries a slight salty taste that experienced Arctic sailors learn to appreciate. The psychological challenges of Arctic water management were as severe as the technical ones. Crew members had to resist the overwhelming temptation to eat snow or ice directly, which would lower their core body temperature and waste precious body heat that was essential for survival in sub-zero conditions. The discipline required to melt ice properly before consumption, even when desperately thirsty, represented a crucial survival skill that separated experienced Arctic hands from novices. You're experiencing this discipline now as you feel the intense thirst that comes from working in extremely dry, cold air, but you resist the natural impulse to grab a handful of nearby snow. Instead, you wait for properly melted and warmed water, understanding that this patient approach to hydration is essential for maintaining body heat and energy in Arctic conditions. Arctic vessels also pioneered advanced techniques for preventing water from freezing in storage containers. Traditional barrels and casks would crack when their contents froze, destroying both the container and the precious water supply. Arctic sailors developed multiple strategies for maintaining liquid water supplies even in extreme cold. The ship's carpenter shows you how they modify water storage containers for Arctic conditions. Barrels are wrapped in layers of insulating material, often sailcloth stuffed with whatever organic matter was available, sometimes even crew members' spare clothing. The most critical water supplies are stored in the warmest parts of the ship, often near the galley stove or in sleeping areas where body heat helps prevent freezing. You're observing the daily ritual of water management in Arctic conditions now. Crew members take turns during night watches to check water supplies, gently agitating containers to prevent ice formation and adding small amounts of warm water to storage barrels to maintain liquid state. This constant attention to water temperature requires discipline and teamwork that extends far beyond normal maritime water management. The most innovative Arctic water technique involved creating body water, using personal body heat to maintain small supplies of liquid water for emergency use. Experienced Arctic sailors would keep small containers of water inside their clothing next to their bodies, using personal body heat to prevent freezing while ensuring access to liquid water even if ship supplies became inaccessible. Feel yourself now carrying one of these body-warmed water containers inside your heavy Arctic clothing. The metal flask presses against your ribs, warmed by your body heat but also drawing heat away from your core. This represents the delicate balance that Arctic sailors had to maintain, preserving liquid water while conserving the body heat that kept them alive in temperatures that could kill within minutes of exposure. Arctic expeditions also developed sophisticated techniques for melting ice and snow efficiently while conserving fuel supplies that were even more precious than water in polar conditions. Traditional fires were impossible on ice-covered ships in howling Arctic winds, so crews learned to create efficient melting systems using minimal fuel and maximum heat conservation. The ship's engineer demonstrates a compact ice melting system that operates inside the ship's galley. Multiple nested pots allow maximum heat transfer from the small stove, while careful management of fuel consumption ensures that enough remains for cooking and emergency heating. The melted ice water is immediately transferred to insulated containers to prevent refreezing. Watch the precise choreography of Arctic water production. Every movement is calculated to minimize heat loss and maximize efficiency. Crew members work in pairs, one managing the fire and melting process while another handles containers and transfers, ensuring that precious heat energy isn't wasted through unnecessary exposure to Arctic air. The medical knowledge that Arctic sailors developed around cold weather hydration was far ahead of its time. They understood that dehydration occurred more rapidly in extreme cold, partly because the dry Arctic air pulled moisture from the body through breathing, and partly because cold conditions suppressed the normal thirst response that helped people maintain proper hydration in warmer climates. You're learning to recognize the subtle signs of cold weather dehydration that experienced Arctic hands used to monitor crew health. Unlike dehydration in warm climates, cold weather dehydration often appeared as fatigue and confusion rather than obvious thirst. Successful Arctic expeditions required constant attention to crew hydration levels, with experienced officers monitoring water consumption as carefully as they watched for signs of frostbite or hypothermia. The social dynamics of water management in Arctic conditions created unique challenges that required innovative leadership approaches. Traditional maritime hierarchies had to adapt to conditions where sharing body heat for water preservation might require intimate cooperation between crew members of different ranks, and where individual hoarding of water supplies could endanger the entire expedition. You're participating now in the evening water distribution ritual aboard the Arctic vessel. Unlike the formal ceremonies of warmer maritime regions, Arctic water distribution emphasizes speed and efficiency to minimize exposure to cold air. But the underlying principles remain the same: fair distribution, careful measurement, and community responsibility for ensuring that everyone receives adequate hydration for survival. Transport yourself now to the South China Sea in the 13th century, aboard a Chinese treasure ship during the height of the Song dynasty's maritime expansion. These massive vessels, some over 400 feet long, carried crews of hundreds across the monsoon-dominated waters of Southeast Asia, developing water management techniques that were more sophisticated than anything found in the Western world at the time. You find yourself in the ship's water management center, a complex of interconnected chambers deep in the vessel's hull, where Chinese naval engineers have created an integrated system for collecting, storing, treating, and distributing water that rivals modern municipal systems. The scale and sophistication of these arrangements would not be matched in European vessels for another 500 years. The Chinese approach to maritime water management reflected thousands of years of hydraulic engineering experience on land. These sailors brought to the ocean the same systematic thinking that had created the Grand Canal and the massive irrigation systems that fed China's vast population. Their ships incorporated principles of water flow, storage, and treatment that were based on advanced understanding of hydraulic principles. Watch as the ship's watermaster, a position of enormous responsibility and prestige, demonstrates the vessel's rainwater collection system. Unlike the simple cloth funnels used by European sailors, this system incorporates multiple collection surfaces, filtration stages, and storage redundancies that ensure maximum capture and purification of monsoon rainfall. The collection system begins with specially woven silk screens that stretch across designated areas of the ship's deck. These screens serve multiple purposes. They filter out debris and impurities from rainwater while allowing maximum water collection, and they can be quickly deployed or stored depending on weather conditions. The filtered water flows through carefully constructed channels into a series of settling tanks where particles can precipitate out before the water moves to long-term storage. You're helping to deploy these collection screens now, as monsoon clouds gather on the horizon. The silk material feels incredibly fine under your hands, woven with a precision that allows water molecules to pass through while blocking even tiny particles of debris. The crew moves with practiced efficiency, knowing that monsoon rains can arrive suddenly and with tremendous intensity. Chinese vessels also pioneered the use of ceramic storage systems that were far superior to the wooden barrels used by most maritime cultures. These ceramic containers, produced by the same artisans who created China's famous porcelain, were designed specifically for maritime water storage, with features that wouldn't appear in European vessels for centuries. The ceramic water containers are works of art as well as functional storage systems. Each one is individually crafted with internal glazes that prevent water contamination, carefully designed shapes that minimize sloshing during rough seas, and tight-fitting lids that create almost perfect seals against contamination and evaporation. The containers are nested in specially built racks that protect them from damage while allowing easy access for water distribution. You're examining one of these ceramic masterpieces now, running your hands over the smooth glazed surface that feels almost glass-like in its perfection. The container holds 50 gallons of water but weighs less than equivalent wooden storage systems, and the ceramic material won't absorb water or harbor the bacteria that made wooden containers problematic. For long-term storage, Chinese naval water treatment incorporated medicinal knowledge that was centuries ahead of Western understanding. Chinese maritime physicians understood that certain herbs and minerals could purify water while adding beneficial properties that enhanced crew health during long voyages. These treatments were based on traditional Chinese medicine principles that viewed water not just as hydration, but as a carrier for therapeutic compounds. The ship's physician demonstrates the preparation of medicinal waters that will be distributed to crew members based on their individual health needs and the specific challenges of their duties aboard ship. Different herbal combinations address the digestive problems common during sea voyages, the joint pain that affects sailors who work in constantly damp conditions, and the immune system challenges that arise when large numbers of people live in close quarters for months at a time. Watch as he carefully measures precise amounts of dried herbs into silk pouches that will be suspended in water storage containers. The herbs slowly release their beneficial compounds into the stored water, creating medicinal drinks that serve both hydration and therapeutic purposes. This represents a level of sophistication in maritime medicine that wouldn't appear in Western vessels until the 18th century. The social organization of water management aboard Chinese vessels reflected Confucian principles of hierarchy and mutual responsibility that created remarkably efficient systems for resource distribution. Unlike the often brutal discipline of European ships, Chinese vessels maintained order through internalized codes of conduct that made water sharing and conservation matters of personal honor rather than externally imposed rules. You're participating now in the daily water ceremony that begins each morning aboard the treasure ship. Crew members gather in groups based on their duties and ranks, but the ritual emphasizes the interdependence of all personnel rather than the superiority of officers over common sailors. The watermaster recites traditional prayers that ask for favorable weather and abundant rainfall while reminding everyone of their responsibility to conserve and share water supplies wisely. Chinese vessels operating during monsoon seasons developed sophisticated techniques for predicting and preparing for the dramatic weather changes that characterized Southeast Asian waters. Monsoon rains could provide weeks' worth of water in a few hours, but they also brought storms that could destroy collection systems and contaminate stored supplies if crews weren't properly prepared. The navigation officer explains how Chinese sailors read subtle changes in wind patterns, cloud formations, and sea conditions to predict monsoon arrivals days before the storms became visible on the horizon. This advance warning allowed crews, to prepare water collection systems for maximum efficiency while securing storage containers and protecting existing supplies from storm damage. You're helping to prepare the ship for an approaching monsoon now, working with crew members to secure loose equipment while deploying additional collection surfaces that will capture the torrential rainfall. The preparation requires careful balance, maximizing water collection opportunities while protecting the ship and crew from the destructive forces that accompany monsoon storms. The engineering behind Chinese water distribution systems incorporated principles of pressure and flow that enabled efficient delivery of water throughout massive vessels without the manual carrying that characterized most maritime water systems. Chinese naval architects understood how to use gravity feed systems, pressure equalization, and flow regulation to create distribution networks that operated with minimal human labor. You're observing this distribution system in operation as the evening water ration is delivered throughout the ship. Water flows through bamboo pipes and ceramic channels that carry it from central storage areas to distribution points near crew, quarters, and work areas. The system operates almost silently, a testament to the precision engineering that eliminates the noise and inefficiencies of traditional bucket-carrying systems. Chinese maritime water management also incorporated advanced techniques for extending the useful life of stored water through controlled fermentation processes that created mildly alcoholic beverages similar to those developed independently by Roman and medieval European sailors. However, Chinese fermentation techniques were more sophisticated, incorporating specific bacterial cultures that produced beneficial compounds while preventing harmful contamination. The ship's brewer, a position that required extensive knowledge of both chemistry and medicine, demonstrates the careful process of creating fermented water that will remain safe and nutritious for months of storage. Unlike the crude fermentation techniques used by many maritime cultures, Chinese brewers understood how to control fermentation conditions to produce consistent results with predictable alcohol content and nutritional value. Find yourself now aboard a traditional Polynesian voyaging canoe in the vast Pacific Ocean, perhaps 800 years ago, navigating by stars and ocean swells across thousands of miles of open water with no land in sight. You're part of one of humanity's most remarkable maritime achievements, the settlement of Pacific islands by sailors who developed water management techniques perfectly adapted to tropical ocean conditions and extremely limited storage capacity. The double-hulled canoe beneath you represents centuries of evolution in Pacific maritime design, optimized for long-distance voyaging with minimal crew and cargo space. Every cubic inch of storage has been carefully planned, and water management occupies a central place in the vessel's design and operation. Unlike the massive ships of other maritime cultures, these canoes must accomplish ocean crossings with water storage measured in individual coconuts rather than tons. You're learning now from the master navigator, whose knowledge encompasses not just the stars and currents that guide the canoe's path, but also the intricate understanding of tropical water sources that makes Pacific island settlement possible. This navigator can identify the presence of land from subtle changes in cloud patterns that indicate fresh water sources and can predict rainfall from atmospheric conditions that would be invisible to sailors from other maritime traditions. The canoe's water storage system consists primarily of specially prepared coconuts and gourds, each one individually selected and prepared for maximum storage efficiency and minimum spoilage risk. The coconuts retain their natural shells, which provide perfect, sterile containers for fresh water, while sealed gourds offer additional storage capacity for emergency supplies. Watch as experienced crew members demonstrate the technique for preparing coconuts for water storage. Each coconut is carefully inspected for cracks or weak spots that could lead to spoilage. Then a small hole is drilled through one of the eyes using traditional tools made from bone and stone. The coconut water is drained and consumed immediately. Its high electrolyte content makes it perfect for maintaining hydration in tropical conditions, and the empty shell is thoroughly cleaned before being filled with precious fresh water. To Sikia, preparation process includes blessing ceremonies that reflect the spiritual significance of water in Polynesian culture. These aren't merely superstitious rituals, but practical traditions that ensure careful attention to water quality and storage procedures. Each coconut container receives individual attention that maximizes its chances of preserving clean water throughout the voyage. You're participating now in the sacred water preparation ceremony, handling each coconut container with the reverence that Polynesian sailors reserve for life-sustaining resources. The spiritual framework transforms practical water management into meaningful ritual that reinforces community cooperation and individual responsibility for the group's survival. Pacific. Islanders developed perhaps the most sophisticated understanding of natural water indicators in maritime history. Polynesian navigators could identify the presence of land and fresh water sources from atmospheric clues that would be completely invisible to sailors from other traditions. These techniques enabled voyages across thousands of miles of trackless ocean with confidence that water sources could be located when needed. The master navigator teaches you to read the subtle signs that indicate fresh water sources on distant islands. Certain cloud formations appear over land masses with significant fresh water. The water evaporates and creates distinctive cloud patterns that experienced navigators can identify from distances of over 100 miles. Bird flight patterns also indicate the presence of fresh water, as many seabirds require daily access to fresh water for drinking, and will fly directly to land-based sources at dawn and dusk. You're practicing these observational skills now, learning to distinguish between the clouds that form over saltwater and those that indicate freshwater sources on land. The differences are subtle, variations in color, density, and movement patterns that require years of experience to interpret accurately. But master navigators can use these signs to locate tiny atolls in the vast Pacific with remarkable precision. The most remarkable aspect of Polynesian water management was their understanding of how to utilize every possible source of fresh water during ocean voyages. Unlike sailors from other traditions who focused primarily on stored water supplies, Pacific navigators knew how to extract drinking water from sources that other maritime cultures never considered. The canoe carries specially woven mats that serve multiple purposes, including the collection of dew and condensation that forms during cool tropical nights. These mats are deployed each evening in positions that maximize moisture collection from night air, then wrung out each morning to provide small but crucial amounts of fresh water that supplement stored supplies. You're helping to deploy these collection mats now as evening approaches and the tropical air begins to cool. The woven fibers are arranged to create maximum surface area for dew formation while allowing easy collection of the moisture that accumulates overnight. This technique can provide several cups of fresh water each night during voyages through humid tropical air masses. Polynesian sailors also understood how to process rainwater more efficiently than maritime cultures with larger storage capacities. Their techniques focused on capturing and storing every possible drop from tropical squalls, using integrated collection systems that could harvest water from brief, intense rainfall that other sailors might barely notice. The canoe's sail system doubles as a rainwater collection surface when weather conditions permit. The specially treated bark cloth sails are designed to shed water efficiently during storms, but can be reconfigured during calm conditions to create collection surfaces that channel rainwater into storage containers. This dual-purpose design reflects the careful optimization that characterizes all aspects of Pacific maritime technology. Watch as the crew quickly reconfigures the sailing system to capture water from an approaching tropical squall. The transformation takes only minutes, but it converts the entire sail area into an efficient water collection system that can gather gallons of fresh water from even brief rainfall. The collected water flows through carefully designed channels into coconut and gourd storage containers. The social aspects of Pacific water management reflected the communal values that enabled successful long-distance voyaging in small vessels with limited resources. Water sharing followed traditional protocols that ensured fair distribution, while maintaining the social harmony essential for successful ocean crossings. These protocols were based on kinship relationships and traditional obligations that were far more complex than the simple hierarchies of other maritime cultures. You're participating now in the daily water distribution ceremony that maintains social balance aboard the voyaging canoe. Each person receives water according to traditional protocols that consider their role in the voyage, their physical needs, and their relationships to other crew members. The ceremony reinforces community bonds while ensuring that water allocation follows time-tested principles that have enabled successful Pacific voyaging for centuries. Pacific Islanders also developed unique techniques for extending water supplies. Through dietary management that reduced the body's water requirements, traditional Pacific maritime diets included foods that were naturally high in water content and low in salt, reducing the physiological water needs that constrained other maritime cultures. The canoe carries carefully selected foods that provide nutrition while minimizing water consumption requirements. Breadfruit paste, taro preparations, and other traditional foods contain significant water content, while providing the carbohydrates and minerals needed for sustained physical effort. During long voyages, these foods represent centuries of experimentation in maritime nutrition that optimized caloric value while minimizing water consumption. You're sampling these traditional voyaging foods now, experiencing the subtle flavors and satisfying nutrition that sustained Pacific navigators during month-long ocean crossings. The foods taste different from the preserved meats and hardtack that characterized other maritime diets. They're designed to work in harmony with the body's water needs, rather than creating additional demands for scarce fresh water supplies. Integration of navigation and water management skills that characterized Polynesian seamanship represents one of maritime history's greatest achievements. Pacific navigators understood that successful voyaging required simultaneous mastery of sailing techniques, weather prediction, celestial navigation, and water procurement, all combined into a unified system of knowledge that enabled human settlement of the world's largest ocean. As you rest beneath the Southern Cross tonight, surrounded by the vast Pacific that stretches to every horizon, you carry with you the wisdom of maritime cultures that transformed humanity's relationship with water from desperate scarcity to sustainable abundance. The gentle motion of the canoe beneath you connects your dreams to the eternal rhythm of ocean swells that have carried human hopes and dreams across every sea on Earth. And so our journey through the maritime history of water management draws to its gentle close, like a ship finally reaching harbor after a long and eventful voyage. You've traveled through time from ancient Mediterranean ports to modern research vessels, experiencing firsthand the ingenuity, desperation, innovation, and triumph that characterized humanity's relationship with one of life's most basic necessities. The stories we've shared tonight will continue flowing through your dreams like water itself, sometimes as gentle streams of peaceful contemplation, sometimes as dramatic currents of adventure and discovery, but always as part of the endless ocean of human experience that connects past, present, and future. Rest now in the knowledge that you carry within you the accumulated wisdom of countless generations of sailors, navigators, and maritime innovators. Their creativity becomes your creativity. Their resilience becomes your resilience. And their respect for life's essential gifts becomes your own deeper appreciation for the abundance that surrounds you. The gentle rhythm of waves will carry you into peaceful sleep, just as it has carried millions of sailors before you. The same ocean that challenged ancient mariners provides comfort tonight. Its eternal motion a reminder that some things remain constant even as human capabilities continue to evolve and improve. Thank you for joining me on this long voyage through maritime history. May your dreams be filled with the gentle sounds of water, the lapping of waves against ancient hulls, the precious trickle of rain into collection vessels, and the satisfying flow of clean, fresh water that represents humanity's ultimate triumph over the challenge of staying alive on the endless sea. Sweet dreams, fellow traveler. Until our next journey together through the fascinating currents of human history.